In the outskirts of Salem, Oregon, where the night air always seemed colder and lonelier than it should be, a 12-year-old homeless boy named Evan tried to fall asleep between two weathered gravestones. He had made the old cemetery his shelter for months, ever since his mother died and the system pushed him from one crowded shelter to another. Tonight the wind cut through the trees like a blade, the branches creaking as though the dead themselves were whispering. Evan curled into his thin jacket, clutching the only possession he had left from his mother, a frayed bandana she once used for work. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and sleep came only in shivering bursts.
Som timer after midnight, a sounds grept trugse silence.
At first, Evan thought it was just the wind dragging across the cracked stone markers. But then it came again, faint and uneven, a trembling whimper that didn't sound like anything the night normally carried. Evan lifted his head, his breath visible in the cold air. The sound came from the newest burial plot beside the large cedar tree, a mound of soil still fresh and darker than the rest. His heart hammered as the noise returned, this time a broken moan muffled under layers of dirt. For a moment he froze. Cemeteries were frightening enough without bodies calling out from underground. But fear was nothing new to Evan. He'd lived with it for years, and it never stopped him from doing what he felt was right. Slowly he stood, stepping toward the mound, the grass crunching beneath his torn shoes. Another faint cry slipped through the soil. Evan's chest tightened as realization struck him. Someone was alive under there. Someone had been buried alive. Without thinking further, he dropped to his knees and began clawing at the dirt with his bare hands. The cold soil tore his fingernails and scraped his knuckles raw, but he kept digging, faster and harder, sweat mixing with dirt until his hands stung. The ground was heavy and wet, sticking together in thick clumps that made every movement exhausting. He whispered to himself, hoping the person underneath could somehow hear him. "Hold on.
Don't stop fighting.
I'm coming." Minutes stretched like hours until his fingers brushed fabric. He froze, then frantically brushed away more soil. Beneath the thin layer was a face, pale and lifeless except for the faintest flutter of breath.
A woman.
Her hair, once styled and glossy, was caked with mud. Her lips were blue, her eyes half open in terror. Evan gasped.
"Mom, can you hear me?"
Her eyelids twitched, and a soft gasp escaped her chest. She was alive. Barely, but alive. Summoning strength his tiny body never should have had, he dug under her shoulders and pulled. The weight nearly toppled him, but inch by inch he freed her upper body from the pit. She coughed violently, mud spilling from her mouth, and Evan wiped her face with his bandana, the only clean thing he owned. "Please stay with me," he begged.
"I won't leave you." The woman shivered uncontrollably, her voice rasping out like broken glass.
"Help me." It wasn't even loud enough to echo. Evan didn't know who she was, how she ended up under the dirt, or whether someone was coming back to finish the job. But he knew she wouldn't survive if he stayed in the open. He dragged her from the grave, his muscles shaking, his breath growing thin, until both collapsed onto the cold ground. "Don't die," Evan whispered, pressing his hands against her cheeks to warm them. "I promise I'll get you to safety."
"Just don't die."
With no one around at this late hour and no hope that anyone would believe a homeless kid, Evan wrestled her onto his back. She was far too heavy for him, but fear and determination gave him strength that hunger usually stole away. Step by step, slipping on wet grass, he carried her toward an abandoned toolshed he often used during storms. By the time he reached it, his arms had gone numb, and his legs trembled violently, but he refused to drop her. Inside, the shed smelled of rust and old leaves. It wasn't warm, but at least it wasn't open to the freezing wind. Evan laid the woman on a stack of old tarps and then wrapped her in his thin blanket, shivering even harder without it. Her breathing was shallow, but it was steady enough to give him hope. When her eyes opened again, even just a little, Evan leaned closer. You're safe for now, he whispered.
Who did this to you? Her lips parted.
My husband, her voice cracked, each word scraping painfully from her throat.
He vantet me gone.
Evan felt the world tilt. A husband burying his wife alive. That wasn't just cruelty. That was evil. She struggled, whispering again, "He'll come back, he thinks I'm dead, he'll finish it if he finds me." The boy swallowed his fear. "I'll protect you," he said, though he was barely half her size. "I swear." For the first time that night, she looked directly into his eyes. Something in her expression softened, as if she wasn't used to anyone believing Hera caring at all. "What is your name?" "Evan," he answered. "Just Evan. I don't really have anyone." Her fingers trembled as she reached weakly toward him.
You savet me, Evan.
He didn't know it yet, but the woman he'd rescued was Marissa Hale, one of the most powerful business figures on the West Coast. A billionaire whose face filled magazines, whose companies shaped entire cities. None of that mattered now. She was no longer a symbol of wealth, but a human being balanced between life and death. And the only person standing between her and the man who wanted her gone was a 12-year-old boy with nothing but courage and a torn bandana. Outside, the wind howled through the cemetery, rattling the chains on the shed door. Inside, two strangers who never should have crossed paths clung to the thin thread of survival. Evan lay on the floor beside her, keeping watch as if he were guarding the most precious life in the world. He didn't sleep. He didn't move. He just stayed there, eyes wide, ready to fight anyone who came through that door. Because for the first time in years, Evan had something worth protecting.
The morning crept into the abandoned shed slowly, spilling pale grey light through the cracks in the warped wooden boards.
Evan hadn't slept a single second. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands still caked with dried mud from digging Marissa out of her grave. Every few minutes he leaned closer to check her breathing, terrified that at any moment it might stop. She lay wrapped in his single blanket, shivering uncontrollably as the dawn chill seeped into the shed like a ghost searching for a place to settle. When she finally stirred, it wasn't gentle. Her whole body spasmed in a fit of coughing, each cough tight and painful, forcing her lungs to fight for air. Evan panicked, steadying her with his trembling hands. "You're okay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if that was true. "Just breathe."
I'm right here.
Her fingers clawed weakly at his sleeve. "Water." Evan looked around the shed, but the only thing in sight was dust, rusted tools, and a broken chair. His throat felt tight. He couldn't leave her alone, but he couldn't let her die of dehydration either. After a moment of battling with the fear in his chest, he made a decision. "I'll get you water," he promised. "But please don't try to move."
I'll be quick.
Her cloudy eyes pleaded with him, as if she feared every second he was gone. Evan tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders and whispered, "You survived being buried. You can survive 15 minutes without me. Just hold on." He slipped out of the shed, closing the door behind him as quietly as possible. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet soil from last night's frost. The cemetery looked different in daylightless haunting, more lonely. Evan sprinted down the hill toward town, his legs aching from carrying Marissa hours before. His ribs throbbed with each breath, but he kept going.
The edge of Salem was waking up slowly.
Diner signs flickered to life, a school bus rumbled down the street, and joggers in bright jackets passed him by without sparing the dirty boy a second glance.
Evan ducked behind the gas station, reaching the vending machine.
He checked his pockets. Nothing. Not even a dime. His stomach sank, but desperation pushed him forward. He slipped inside the gas station convenience store, eyes darting around. The clerk was reading a newspaper, half asleep, barely noticing him. Evan grabbed a bottle of water and a small packet of crackers, hiding them inside his torn jacket. He wasn't proud of stealing. But pride meant nothing when someone's life was on the line. He reached the door, thinking he was in the clear, when a voice from the radio behind the counter froze him mid-step. "Breaking news," the announcer said. "Authorities have confirmed that real estate tycoon Marissa Hale died last night in what appears to be a tragic accident. The family has requested privacy during this difficult time." Evan's heart crashed against his ribs.
Marissa Hale.
Dead. Announced on public radio. But she was alive. Barely, but alive. He had seen her breathing, felt her weak grip on his arm. The clerk looked up and noticed Evan standing still. "Kid, you paying for that?" Evan bolted out the door before the man could chase him, the clerk shouting after him as he disappeared between parked cars. His mind raced, the pieces sliding together in a chilling pattern.
Someone wanted the world to believe Marissa Hale was dead.
Someone powerful enough to rush an announcement before her body was even found. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to bury her alive. Her husband. The man she whispered about last night with terror in her voice. Evan ran faster, the bottle of water slamming against his ribs with every stride. He cut through the back roads, hopped over a rusted fence, and sprinted across the cemetery field. By the time he reached the shed, his lungs burned and his legs shook violently. He pushed the door open and froze.
Marissa wasn't lying still anymore.
She had dragged herself halfway upright despite her pain, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide and terrified, staring into the dim light as though expecting a shadow to appear at any moment. "They said I'm dead," she whispered when she saw Evan. Her voice cracked as though speaking the words forced her heart to break. I heard the funeral report on someone's radio outside. They already announced it. They're erasing me." Evan dropped to his knees beside her. "I'll protect you," he said, breathless but determined.
"I won't let them hurt you again."
She shook her head weakly.
"You don't understand.
Derek has influence in every corner of this city. If he finds out I survived last night, if he learns that a child saw everything, he won't stop." Evan swallowed hard. No one had ever hunted him before. No one had ever considered him important enough to silence. But now he wasn't just a homeless kid surviving day to day. He was the witness to a billionaire's attempted murder. And he was the only reason Marissa Hale was still breathing. Marissa's voice softened.
"Why did you save me, Evan?
You didn't even know who I was." He hesitated, unsure how to explain something that came from a place deeper than logic. "Because you were trapped," he said quietly. "And I know what that feels like."
"When you need someone and no one comes."
"I couldn't let that happen to you." Something in her expression cracked an emotion she had probably buried long before she herself was buried. Tears filled her eyes, trailing down her mud-streaked cheeks. "You're the only person who has protected me in years," she whispered. "A child doing what none of my own security or staff bothered to do." Evan wiped her tears with the corner of his bandana.
"You're safe with me."
But even as he said it, the faint rumble of an engine echoed through the cemetery.
Evan stiffened, craveling to the narrow crack in the wall.
A black SUV was creeping along the dirt path, its tinted windows impossible to see through. It was moving slowly. Too slowly. As if searching. A chill ran up his spine.
Marissa's breath hitched.
"That's Derek's. I know that car." Evan's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's looking for a body that isn't there." For a moment the world felt unbearably small, the shed too fragile, Marissa too weak, Evan too outmatched. But he clenched his fists, standing protectively in front of her. "We're leaving," he said. "I don't know how, but we're not staying here. He won't find you." Outside, The SUV engine idled. A door opened.
Bootstuche zergraunt.
Someone was coming. And Evan realized the fight for Marissa's life had only just begun. The footsteps outside the shed grew heavier, crunching the frosted grass with slow, deliberate pressure. Whoever was out there wasn't wandering or searching casually. The rhythm of those steps carried intent. Purpose. And Evan knew instantly that purpose had everything to do with the woman trembling behind him. He pressed his back against the door, trying to steady his breath, but his heart pounded so hard it felt like the stranger outside could hear it. The thin wooden boards separating them from danger seemed pathetically fragile, as though one hard push could shatter them. Marissa, still half covered in his blanket, whispered his name in a frightened rasp. "Evan, please tell me you have a plan." He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to reassure her with strength he didn't have. But the truth was simple and terrifying. He was 12. He had no plan. He had no weapons, no allies, no safety net. All he had was stubbornness and a promise he refused to break, to protect the woman who should have died last night but didn't. Through the cracks in the door, Evan caught a glimpse of dark slacks and polished shoes too expensive for an average man, too crisp for a cemetery worker. The figure paused only a few feet away. Evan's breath caught in his throat. A voice followed, low, smooth, and eerily calm. "You did a sloppy job burying her," the man muttered into his phone. "The ground looks disturbed." "I don't care. Make sure Derek understands. If the body isn't here, someone moved it." Evan felt a jolt of fear so sharp it almost knocked him backward. This wasn't just a man looking for a missing coffin. This was someone who knew Marissa had been alive long enough to escape the grave. Someone who intended to fix that loose end. He mouthed silently to Marissa, "Stay quiet." She nodded, though tears streamed silently down her face. For a moment the man lingered, scanning the area. Evan pressed both hands against the door, ready to brace it with all the strength his skinny frame could provide. The man's shadow swept across the shed, pausing as if he sensed movement inside. Evan tensed, ready to fight or run or scream. Then, mercifully, the shadow shifted away.
Ze man valke towards tree line, marking a slow circle around the fresh grave.
Evan didn't exhale until he heard the SUV door open and the engine growl to life. The vehicle rolled away, its tires crackling over gravel, until the echo faded completely. Evan sank to his knees, trembling from adrenaline. Marissa tried to sit up further, fear etched into every line of her face. "He'll be back," she whispered. "He didn't see the body. He knows something's wrong." Evan nodded.
We can stay here.
"We need someone who can help us, someone who doesn't work for your husband." Marissa laughed bitterly, a sound filled with despair and exhaustion.
"You don't understand, Evan.
Derek owns people. Officers. Lawyers. Employees. Friends. Enemies. He buys them all. Anyone I once trusted could be waiting to hand me back to him." Evan looked at her pale face, her cracked lips, the dirt still clinging to her skin. She needed medical care, warmth, security, things he had never had himself. Then an idea sparked in his mind. A dangerous idea, but one that might be their only chance. He remembered an old man named Harold Beck. A mechanic who had lived in the small neighborhood by the train yard. Harold used to give Evan leftover food when Evan wandered through, too hungry to pretend otherwise. Harold had once told him he worked for some big real estate firm and got fired for refusing to do something dirty. Evan never asked what it was, but the bitterness in Harold's voice that day was unforgettable.
"What about Harold?" Evan whispered.
"He said he used to work for some big company and got fired for refusing to do something bad." Marissa stared at him for several seconds, blinking slowly, as though his words carried a hidden meaning she needed time to decipher. What was the company called? I'm not sure, Evan admitted. Some fancy name. Hale something, I think. Marissa's face went utterly still. Hale Meridian? She asked, her voice barely more than a breath. I think that's it. Marissa closed her eyes, a tremor running down her body. He worked for me.
Harold Beck, oh Gott.
He was loyal. He warned me once that Derek was forging documents behind my back, shifting power in the company. Harold confronted him, and Derek fired him the next day. I thought Harold had overreacted. I never looked into it. I never apologized. Her voice broke.
I schuld we listend.
Evan didn't fully understand corporate betrayals, forged documents, or hostile takeovers, but he understood one thing clearly: Harold Beck wasn't Derek's man. Which meant he might be the only person who could help a nearly frozen woman survive a murder attempt. But they needed to get to him. And Marissa could barely stand. Evan helped her to her feet, her arm slung weakly over his shoulder. She winced in pain, but forced herself upright. Step by step, they crept out of the shed, avoiding the path where the SUV had been. Evan guided her along the cemetery's edge, taking the long route through thick brush until they reached the back road where few cars ever passed. It took nearly an hour to make it out of the cemetery grounds. Marissa stumbled repeatedly, her breath hitching each time her lungs tried to catch up. Evan supported as much of her weight as he could, even though his own energy was fading fast. He had no breakfast, no sleep, and no strength left, but he refused to stop. When they finally reached the small trailer park by the train yard, the metallic scent of diesel lingered in the cold air. Evan spotted Harold's trailer, immediately the one with the crooked mailbox and wind chimes made of old tools. He banged weakly on the door.
Mr. Beck, please open up. For a moment nothing happened.
Then the metal door cracked open, revealing Harold's weathered face and suspicious eyes. His gaze dropped to Evan first, then widened when he saw the half-conscious woman leaning into the boy. Son, what the hell happened to her?
Harold demanded. Evan's voice shook. It's Marissa Hale.
She's alive. But someone tried to kill her. Harold froze as though lightning struck him. His mouth opened slowly, shock rippling through every feature. He stared at the woman who once sat at the head of a glass-walled boardroom, now looking like a ghost risen from the dead.
Marissa?
Is that really you?
Her lips parted. Harold, she whispered.
I need help. Those 3 words shattered whatever anger or betrayal Harold had carried all these years. He threw the door wide open. Get her inside. Now. Evan guided her in. Harold's trailer was cluttered but warm, filled with old engine parts and photos of better days. He grabbed blankets, wrapped them around Marissa, and lit the small propane heater. For the first time since crawling out of the ground, she stopped shivering.
Harold knelt beside her.
Who did this to you? She looked straight into his eyes, the truth trembling on her lips.
Derek, she whispered.
He tried to bury me alive.
Harold's jaw tightened, fury boiling beneath his calm exterior.
I told you he was dirty. I told you years ago.
Evan stepped forward. Mr.
Beck, we need more than warmth. We need proof. Evidence. Something to show the police.
Harold let out a long breath.
I might have something.
The night Derek had emilfiert, I saved a hard drive.
Company documents, signatures, transfers, things he didn't want anyone to see. Marissa stared at him, stunned. You kept evidence? All these years? I knew one day it might matter, Harold said quietly. But I never imagined it'd be because he tried to kill you. Evan met Marissa's gaze, a spark of hope lighting her tired eyes. Harold stood, his expression grim and determined. "If we're going to bring Derek down, we need to move fast. He'll be looking for you." The room fell silent. For the first time since her burial, Marissa Hale felt something she thought was gone forever. A chance. Hope.
A pass to survive.
But outside the trailer, down the nearest road, a black SUV had begun circling the neighborhood, slowly searching. Harold's trailer turned eerily quiet, the kind of silence that arrives only when fear itself is holding its breath. Outside, the train tracks rattled softly in the distance, but inside the small, cluttered space, every sound felt sharpened and amplified: the crackle of the old propane heater, Marissa's strained breathing, the ticking of a dented wall clock. Evan sat beside her, constantly checking her pulse the way he had seen nurses do at the free clinic. She was stable for now, but her skin was cold, her voice barely a whisper, and every minute mattered. Harold paced across the narrow room, rubbing his temples. "The hard drive is hidden," he muttered. "I stashed it years ago. I didn't want Derek getting his hands on it. Never thought I'd need to pull it out like this." Marissa clutched the blanket tighter, closing her eyes briefly as another wave of pain shuddered through her body. "If Derek's assistant realizes I'm missing, if he puts the pieces together." "He will," Harold said grimly.
"Men like Derek don't lie loose ends."
Evan swallowed, his throat dry.
"Where's the hard drive?"
"A few blocks from here," Harold replied, grabbing a faded jacket from the coat rack.
"In my old auto shop."
"The company shut it down after firing me, but the building's still standing. Locked, forgotten, but standing." Evan stood as well.
"We're going with you."
Harold froze. "Absolutely not. It could be dangerous. If Derek's men are looking." "They already are," Evan cut in. A black SUV was circling the cemetery earlier.
"It micht show up anövere. She can stay here alone."
Marissa forced herself upright, leaning on the couch armrest. "Evan's right," she whispered.
"Derek will search everywhere he used to touch."
"And Harold, you were on his blacklist from the moment you opposed him. You're in danger too." Harold stared at them, torn between logic and loyalty. Then he sighed deeply, defeated by the truth.
"Fine.
But we move fast. And carefully." The three slipped out of the trailer just as the afternoon sun dipped behind thick clouds. The cold air slapped against their faces, and for a moment Marissa wheezed, bending over as her lungs fought for breath. Evan steadied her, placing her arm over his shoulder again. She leaned on him heavily, every step agony, but she refused to stop. Harold guided them through a narrow alley between trailers, then across an overgrown field leading toward the industrial part of town. Rusted factories loomed in the distance, their broken windows reflecting the gray sky like jagged teeth.
"No one came here anymore."
It was the kind of place secrets came to rot. When they reached the old auto shop, Evan felt a chill run up his spine. The building was abandoned, its sign faded, the metal siding mottled with rust. Harold's name was still faintly visible along the top Beck's reliable auto, now a ghost of better years. Harold fumbled with the padlock.
"I changed the lock before I left. Derek's people never bothered breaking into I assumed nothing valuable was here."
The door groaned open, releasing the scent of dust and motor oil trapped in still air. Inside, the shop was dim and cluttered, filled with old manuals, tools scattered across tables, and a workbench still stained from years of engines being repaired. Harold walked straight to the far corner, kneeling beside a cabinet bolted to the wall. He pried open a panel behind it, revealing a small metal box wedged into the wall cavity. "Here," he said, pulling it free.
"This is everything I saved."
Documents Derek tried to bury. Emails.
Digital signatures.
Proof of the funds he funneled out of the company. Proof of the threats he made to anyone loyal to Marissa. Marissa stared at the box with a mix of awe and heartbreak. I trusted him, she whispered. For so many years. I let him speak for me at board meetings. I let him fire people. And all this time, he was dismantling my life one piece at a time. Harold placed the box carefully into Evan's hands. This is our weapon. Before Evan could respond, the shop lights flickered. Not because someone turned them on. Because headlights flashed through the dirty windows. A vehicle had pulled up outside. Evan's stomach dropped. They found us. Harold swore under his breath and slammed the hidden panel shut.
Back door now.
But as they turned toward the exit, the front shop door slammed open, hitting the wall with a violent crash. In the doorway stood Derek's assistant, the same man who had inspected the grave that morning. His suit was spotless, his hair gelled perfectly, and his eyes burned with cold determination. "Well," he said, stepping inside with a slow, confident stride.
"Look who rose from the dead."
Marissa's breath hitched, and Evan instinctively stepped in front of her. Harold moved protectively as well. "You need to leave. Right now." The man smirked.
"Harold Beck. Always too honest for your own good."
His gaze shifted to Evan, lingering with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. "And the little stray boy who thinks he can play hero. How cute." Evan balled his fists, but Harold grabbed his shoulder protectively. The assistant took another step.
"Wäre the drive?"
"If you hand it over, maybe I can convince Derek not to bury all three of you in the same hole she was pulled out of." Marissa's voice cut through the room, hoarse but fierce. "You won't touch him." Evan realized she meant him, not Harold. The assistant narrowed his eyes. "You should have stayed dead, Marissa. It would have saved everyone trouble." Harold slowly moved toward his workbench, hands raised casually. Evan recognized the gesture. Harold was reaching for something. A wrench. A tool. Anything to defend them. But the assistant noticed too. "Tsk tisk," the man said, pulling something from inside his coat.
"Evans Breed kaukt was it a gun?"
No. Something worse at that moment. A phone. He pressed speed dial. "I found them," he said into the receiver. Harold lunged toward him, but the assistant stepped back quickly, blocking the doorway. "They're all here," he continued. "Yes.
Alive."
He listened for a moment, nodded once, then slid the phone back into his pocket. "Derek's on his way," he announced. "He wants to finish the job personally." Marissa paled, swaying dangerously. Evan caught her before she fell. Harold clenched his jaw.
"We're leaving through the back."
"You can try," the assistant taunted, "but you won't get far. Derek said to keep you here until he arrives." Evan's eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for an escape route. Then he saw it, the old garage lift, half broken but still operational. If they raised the shop floor panel high enough, there was a crawl space that led to the drainage path behind the alley. It was tight, dark, filthy, but it was a path to survival. "Harold," Evan whispered, tugging his sleeve.
"The crawl space."
Harold followed Evan's gaze and understood instantly. He stepped forward, drawing the assistant's attention. "You've ruined her life enough."
"You won't ruin mine too."
The assistant scoffed.
"You're old, Harold. You can't protect."
He never finished the sentence. Harold swung a metal tool with surprising speed. The assistant stumbled back, startled, not hurt, but distracted. Just enough. Evan grabbed Marissa, dragging her toward the garage lift. Harold yanked the lever, and the hydraulic machine groaned to life, rising inch by inch. The assistant spun around just in time to see the three disappear beneath the platform. "You little.
Get back here."
He lunged, but the lift had risen high enough to hide the crawl space opening. Evan and Marissa slid inside, Harold following right behind, yanking the metal panel shut. They crawled through darkness as the assistant screamed in frustration above them, banging on the lift, shouting into his phone for Derek to hurry. The crawl space opened behind the shop, spilling Evan, Marissa, and Harold into the cold open air. They stumbled to their feet, their breaths heavy, their bodies aching. Harold pointed toward downtown. "There's a lawyer I know. Caleb Morris.
The one person Derek couldn't buy.
He might be our last chance." Evan adjusted his grip on Marissa, pulling her weight onto him again. "Then we go." They limped into the shadows as sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Somewhere behind them, Derek Stanton, Marissa's husband, was getting into his SUV. And he was smiling. The wind sharpened as they reached the edge of downtown Salem, whipping against their faces with a cold that seemed to sink straight into their bones. Marissa was deteriorating fast. Every few steps, her legs trembled as though the ground beneath her were sinking. Evan kept her upright with all the strength his small frame could offer, his pulse pounding with panic. Harold walked slightly ahead, scanning every alley and street corner with the instincts of a man who had spent years looking over his shoulder. They were being hunted, and every second mattered. Caleb Morris's law office sat inside a narrow brick building squeezed between a pawn shop and a boarded-up pharmacy. The sign above the door flickered weakly, one bulb sputtering out as they approached. The atmosphere felt outdated, almost forgotten by the rest of the modern city, but that only made it seem safer. A place Derek would never think to check. Harold knocked 3 times, each strike echoing through the quiet hallway. When the door finally opened, a tall man with sharp eyes and an unshaven jaw appeared. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing ink stains across his forearm, remnants of long nights spent wrestling with legal documents. He looked exhausted, someone who rarely slept, and never willingly. "Harold."
Caleb blinked in surprise.
"It's been years." "What?" Then his gaze landed on Marissa. He went silent. Her hair matted with soil. Her face pale and bruised. Her body wrapped in a thin blanket, barely standing. She looked like a ghost that had wandered too far from the graveyard. "My God," he whispered. "Is that?" "It's me," Marissa breathed, her voice thin as paper. Caleb stepped aside instantly. "Inside. Now." Evan helped Marissa stagger over the threshold while Harold shut the door firmly behind them, sliding the lock into place. Caleb's office was cluttered in the way only the workspace of a dedicated, overworked lawyer could be. Files stacked on nearly every surface, books open to bookmarked pages, old coffee cups perched precariously on cabinet edges. But it felt safe. Warm. Human. Caleb guided Marissa into a leather chair.
"Tell ML everything. Start from the beginning."
Harold leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Derek tried to murder her. Buried her alive in Greenwood Cemetery. Caleb blinked slowly, his jaw locking in place. Does he know she survived? "He will soon," Evan said quietly. One of his men found the grave disturbed. Caleb studied Evan with narrowed eyes, realizing for the first time how young he truly was and how much weight he carried. "And who are you?" "Evan." The boy didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. His presence here said enough. Marissa lifted trembling fingers to her temple. "Caleb, he'll spin this. He'll make it look like I ran away. Like I'm delusional. Or unstable. Or suicidal. He controls so much." Caleb rose, pacing behind his desk. "He may control your board. Your security. Some police officers. But he doesn't control me." He pointed at Harold. "And you're telling me you still have the hard drive with the documents?"
"The forget transfer?" The blackmail material.
Harold nodded. And more. It has everything Derek's been building toward for years. He wanted full ownership of Hale Meridian. He wanted control of her assets. He ran the company through threats and illegal deals. The attempt on her life was his final step. Caleb opened a drawer and pulled out a laptop. We need to plug in that drive. Now. Evan handed it to him carefully. Caleb connected it, typed rapidly, and after a few seconds, files flooded the screen: contracts, money transfers, encrypted messages, time-stamped videos. Caleb's eyes widened with each scroll. This, he whispered. This is enough to destroy him. Marissa let out a breath she had been holding for years. I should have listened to Harold when he tried to warn me. There's no time for guilt, Caleb replied, voice steady. We need a plan. But before they could discuss one, the office phone began to ring. Caleb stared at it, dread filling his features. Nobody calls this line unless they want something important. The ringing continued, echoing through the room like a warning. Marissa flinched, and Evan instinctively moved closer to her. Caleb hesitated, then picked up.
This is Caleb Morris.
A moment of silence followed. Then a familiar voice drifted through the receiver, smooth, chilling, dangerously calm. Caleb, Derek Stanton said. I hear you've been asking questions about my wife. Caleb's eyes darted toward the group. I don't know what you're.
Let's not pretend, Derek interrupted.
You always did have a hero complex. But this time, you're stepping into a fire you can't control. Caleb gripped the phone tightly. You're calling to threaten me? I'm calling to offer you a deal, Derek replied. Step away from whatever lie Harold Beck and that street rat are feeding you. Don't involve yourself in my family affairs, and I won't make your past resurface.
Caleb's face paled.
Evan didn't know why, but Harold seemed to understand instantly. He tensed, his fists tightening. Marissa sat straighter, anger replacing her fear. Caleb, she whispered, hang up. Derek's voice oozed through the receiver again.
You have 5 seconds before I make things complicated. Caleb exhaled sharply.
You've already made things complicated. And he hung up.
Harold locked the door again, checking bot windows.
He knows. We need to leave. Now. Go where? Evan asked. Caleb turned from the desk, his expression fierce with resolve.
The courthouse.
If I file an emergency injunction tonight, I can freeze Derek's assets and force an official investigation. Once the documents hit the system, Derek won't be able to bury them. He'll try to bury us instead, Harold muttered. Caleb grabbed his coat. Then we outrun him. Marissa stood slowly, trembling but determined. If there's even a small chance of stopping him, we take it. Evan nodded. Let's go. They stepped out onto the dimly lit street. The courthouse was several blocks away, a difficult journey for a woman who had technically died less than 24 hours ago. But they began moving, staying close together. Halfway down the block, the sound of an engine rolled toward them. A black SUV. The same one from the cemetery. It slowed as it approached, its tinted window lowering just enough for a familiar voice to drift out. Well, Derek Stanton said with a cold smile. Isn't this a touching reunion? Evan's blood ran ice cold.
Derek was here.
He wasn't sending men anymore. He had come to finish the job himself. The black SUV rolled to a slow, predatory stop in the middle of the street, blocking their path as completely as a steel gate. Its engine rumbled with a deep mechanical growl, vibrating through the pavement under their feet. Evan instinctively stepped in front of Marissa, spreading his arms in a protective stance even though he was only a boy, fragile, trembling, but unyielding. Harold moved beside him, jaw clenched, while Caleb stayed slightly behind, pulling his phone from his coat, recording everything. The tinted window lowered with agonizing slowness. Derek Stanton appeared behind the glass, dressed in a charcoal suit with a scarf neatly wrapped around his neck. His expression was composed, almost bored, as though he were simply stopping to ask for directions. But the darkness in his eyes betrayed him. He was a man accustomed to control. A man furious that his perfect plan had slipped from his grip. "Well," Derek said, his voice steady and poisonous. "I spent all morning searching for a body. And imagine my surprise to find the corpse strolling through town." Marissa stiffened, leaning heavily on Evan. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. "You tried to kill me." Derek chuckled softly, tapping his fingers on the car door. "You always exaggerated things."
I simply accelerated inevitable. You wäre in my way.
Weak. Distracted. A liability to the company you built. "You buried your wife alive," Caleb said sharply. "And now she's standing here, which means you're done, Derek. Completely done." Derek's gaze shifted toward him.
"Ah, Caleb Morris.
The one honest lawyer in Salem. I told you on the phone to stay out of this. And I told you to go to hell."
The SUV door suddenly swung open.
Derek stepped out, the tip of his polished shoe clicking on the pavement. His height, his posture, his calmness, everything radiated dominance. He studied them with quiet confidence, as if he already knew he would win. "You think you have enough evidence to stop me?" Derek asked.
A disgraced mechanic? A homeless child?
A lawyer with a tarnished reputation? And a wife who looks like she crawled out of the earth.
Evan stiffened, fists shaking.
He hated how Derek spoke about Marissa like she was dirt, like she was nothing. Marissa, however, lifted her chin.
I survived you.
That is all that matters.
A small smirk touched Derek's lips.
Not for long. He snapped his fingers. From behind the SUV, two men emerged. The first was Derek's assistant, the same man from the cemetery. The second was a broad-shouldered figure with a shaved head and dark, watchful eyes. Both moved with predatory readiness. Evan's heart hammered. Their escape path was now blocked on both sides. Harold whispered, "Stay behind me," but Evan doubted that would be enough. These men weren't here to scare them. They were here to erase them. Derek clasped his hands casually. "You can make this easy or make it painful. Hand over the hard drive, and maybe I'll let one of you walk away. Just one." Caleb took a slow step back. Not in fear, but in strategy. "Walk away?"
You think we made you in the open without a plan.
Derek frowned. Caleb lifted his phone higher. "This entire conversation is being live-streamed to a secure server. You touch any of us, and the evidence goes straight to the district attorney."
Derek's face hardened.
His assistant shifted uneasily. The large man hesitated. Marissa whispered, "Caleb, is that true?" Caleb didn't blink. "It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if he believes it." And Derek did believe it. He took one step backward, uncertainty flickering in his sharp eyes.
Not für just Kalkulation.
He was measuring consequences. But Derek Stanton didn't retreat without trying one last angle. "You think the police will believe a homeless boy?" he said coldly, turning toward Evan. "Evan, is it? You sleep in cemeteries.
You steal food from convenience stores.
You have no guardians.
No records.
No credibility." Evan swallowed, his entire body shaking. "You're a nobody," Derek continued. "A stray. And no one listens to nobodies."
The cruelty of the words hit Evan like a punch.
But before his courage could falter, Marissa lifted her head and spoke with the last scrap of strength she had. "He's the only reason I'm alive." Derek turned his glare on her. "You were supposed to be dead. And yet here I am," she whispered. "Because a child you dismissed as worthless dug me out with his bare hands." For the first time since stepping out of the SUV, Derek's eyes flickered with something Evan had never seen in him before. Fear.
Not fear of Evan. Fear of the truth.
Fear of a story the public would devour.
Fear of losing control.
Before Derek could react, Harold raised his voice, loud and firm. "We're going to the courthouse."
You can stop us without proving everything you done.
Caleb added, "And if you lay a hand on her again, Derek, you'll be arrested before sunset."
The da oves ML3 verforce.
"Try me."
For a moment, time frotze.
Derek's assistant glanced at him nervously. "Boss, the cameras." He pointed discreetly toward a nearby traffic post. The red light camera was pointed straight at them. Derek didn't need the footage to reveal violence. His reputation alone would erupt into scandal if Marissa collapsed or if anyone screamed. He inhaled through his teeth, a furious calculation playing in his mind. Finally, he turned away sharply. "We're not finished," he said. "Any of you." He stepped back into the SUV. His men reluctantly followed. The engine roared, the tires screeching as the vehicle sped off into traffic. But Derek's voice echoed in Evan's mind, a promise drenched in venom. Not finished. Not even close. The four stood there in the sudden quiet, the cold wind swirling around them. Marissa sagged against Evan, drained completely. Caleb hurried to her side and supported her weight. "We need to move," Caleb said. "If Derek's retreating, it's only because he's shifting strategies." Harold nodded. "Courthouse. Now." They pushed forward, block by block. 2 officers stood outside the courthouse entrance, looking bored and half-frozen. But when they saw Marissa hail the supposedly dead billionaire limping toward them, supported by a child, a mechanic and a lawyer, their eyes widened. "Ma'am, is that?" one officer stammered. Caleb spoke before Marissa could collapse. "Emergency injunction. Attempted murder. Corporate fraud. She needs immediate protection." The officers scrambled to unlock the doors, ushering them inside. The marble corridor was quiet, empty except for the echo of their footsteps. Marissa's legs buckled, but Evan held her upright until they reached the main clerk's desk. Caleb slammed the hard drive onto the counter. "We're filing an urgent complaint. Activate witness protection procedures and notify Judge Reynolds. This cannot wait." Within minutes, chaos erupted. Clerks rushed paperwork. Officers called the DA. Detectives were dispatched. A judge was pulled from a meeting. Caleb presented the digital files. Harold recounted everything he witnessed over the years. Evan told the full story of the burial, every detail shaking as he relived it. And when Marissa spoke weak, broken, but honest, the entire room fell silent. Every lie Derek had crafted for years crumbled in one afternoon. Hours later, just as dusk painted the courthouse windows orange, the final decision came down. Derek Stanton was arrested. His assistant was arrested. His assets were frozen. His board power was suspended. His company was placed under federal investigation. The moment officers escorted Derek into custody, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, he glared at Evan across the hallway. For the first time, the powerful man looked small, crushed not by wealth, not by lawyers, but by a boy who refused to walk away from a voice crying beneath the earth. Evan didn't look away. This time, Derek did. Over the following weeks, Marissa's recovery became the centerpiece of national news. Her survival was labeled a miracle. Evan's rescue was hailed as heroic. Donations poured in for homeless youth programs.
The public demanded justice.
When the trial concluded, Derek was sentenced to life imprisonment for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. His assistant received decades behind bars. And Marissa Hale walked out of court with her head held high, not as a billionaire, but as a woman reborn. As for Evan, he never returned to the cemetery. Because Marissa refused to let him face another night alone. During a quiet morning at her estate, she knelt beside him, her eyes full of warmth he had never seen directed at him before.
You saved me, she said softly. Now let me save you.
She signed the adoption papers with trembling hands and pulled him into an embrace that felt like sunlight after years of winter. And Evan, who had once thought the world had forgotten him, finally discovered what it felt like to belong. A home. A family. A future.